We started really looking last week before, at how that was passed on, not through Joseph, but through Judah. And that's what we're going to really focus on tonight, that passing on through Judah, and then we're going to make our way into Exodus. Lord willing, next week we'll be talking about, we'll probably be looking at the Passover next week, and then we'll get to the Mosaic covenant proper. But I think this background's important so we rightly understand what the Mosaic covenant is. And so I know the youth have been doing the same study. Maybe they were going a little bit faster, I think, so PJ's going to have to come back a bit. He said he felt like he rushed through the Mosaic covenant, but so you're going to get some extra tonight, all right? We're going to be in Genesis chapter 38 tonight. Now this is, if you remember, we looked last week at Genesis 9, and we talked about Genesis 9, at least in the context of, we went back that far to see this curse. Remember, there was a curse placed upon the line of Canaan. So it was Ham or Canaan who sinned against their father Noah, or grandfather Noah, depending on who it was. And verse 25 of chapter 9 says, "Cursed be Canaan." And so that word cursed, remember we talked about how that word cursed actually means to be made an end of, to cut off. And so this is a lot more serious probably than what we tend to typically see in a lot of churches and studies. But some people just try to whitewash oftentimes and make God not look so mean. And it's not that he's mean, it's just that he's just and he's righteous. And so when he says something, it's to stand. And we see that, and we'll keep seeing that as we make our way through this meta-narrative. But we looked there and we saw how that curse then was given to Canaan and how he was to be made an end of. And we saw then how the Israelites wind up in slavery in Egypt. And that's where we really left off last time. And we started talking about Genesis 37 and the story of Joseph. And really from chapter 37 all the way to the end of Genesis in chapter 50, we see that it's really the story of Joseph and how he wound up in Egypt with God's leading and orchestrating of that, how he wound up there providentially in order to protect Israel, in order to give them a place where they could be safe and where they could increase in number. They were to take the land of Canaan, but there was only a family. It was just Abram's family. And when the promise was given, it was just Abram and Mrs. Abram, right? Sarah, his wife. It came 12, and then they wind up in Egypt. There's 70 of them going into Egypt. And so 70 still, although God can do anything, 70 was apparently not the number God wanted in order to take all of Canaan, because that land was promised to Israel, to Abraham and his offspring, who would be the Israelites, down through, we're going to see tonight, Judah. But so chapter 37 picks up the story in Egypt with Joseph, and we see that continue in chapter 39, all the way to the end. So there's this one chapter here. That's not it, I don't think, is it? It should be part 3. Look on further down, maybe. Maybe there's some slides under those. So chapter 38 is seemingly out of place because it tells the story of Judah's sin. And then all of a sudden, again, like I said, chapter 39 picks right back up with Joseph. So a lot of people have been led to believe that this chapter is misplaced, that it really doesn't go here. But I don't think that's the case. I think this is exactly where God wanted it to be, because chapter 38 is going to tell us another reason why the Israelites are in Egypt. And so it's very important in that story. Now, this is a racy chapter, if you will. And so a lot of people will skip over it. But we're going to read it tonight, and we'll try to keep it PG rated, all right? But it can be a little crass. And so, again, a lot of people skip it. In fact, there was a contemporary of Spurgeon, Charles Spurgeon, back in his day, who basically chastised him for preaching this. And he chastised the man back. I can't remember all the exchange that was made, but he told him this is every bit as much of God's word as chapter 37 and chapter 39. And so he taught this chapter and defended that stance. But there's some things that happen here that just aren't pretty. So what I'd like to do tonight is read this chapter. As racy as it might be, I think it would be good for us to read it. And we'll we won't extrapolate. We won't really comment on some of the verses, okay? But I do want us to look at it because, again, it's very important to the context of why Israel wound up in captivity. So follow along if you want to, but chapter 38 of Genesis. "And it came about at that time that Judah departed from his brothers and visited a certain Adulamite whose name was Hira. Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua. And he took her and went in to her. So she conceived and bore a son, and he named him because he made an error. Haha, that's corny. All right, sorry. That's really lame. I apologize. But he made an error here, all right? So he named him And then she conceived again and bore a son and named him Onan. She bore still another son and named him Shelah. And it was at Cazib, that she bore him. Now Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was evil in the sight of Yahweh, so the Lord took his life. Then Judah said to Onan, go to your brother's wife and perform your duty as a brother-in-law to her, and raise up offspring for your brother. Now, what is the duty of the brother-in-law? To raise up offspring for the brother. So he's telling us what that duty was. And this was commonplace in this time. It was in order to preserve family lines. And so this wasn't that unusual. He's basically taking her on as a wife in place of his now dead brother. So to keep that lineage alive. And what would happen then, any offspring that Onan would have with his sister-in-law would be considered his brother's sons and not legally his. They would be legally his brothers. It was, again, a way to preserve the lineage. So Onan knew that his offspring, verse 9, would not be his. So that's why he knows this. So it came about that when he went into his brother's wife, he wasted his seed on the ground in order not to give offspring to his brother. All right? We understand what's happening here, right? Okay? But what he did was displeasing in the sight of Yahweh. So he took his life also. So now those two firstborn have been taken because they were evil in God's sight. This guy sinned against the direct command of God. Then Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, remain a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up, for he thought, I am afraid that he too may die like his brothers. So Tamar went and lived in her father's house. Now, after a considerable time, Shua's daughter, the wife of Judah, died. And when the time of mourning was ended, Judah went up to his sheep shearers at Timnah. And his friend Hira, the Adulamite, he went to see him again. It was told to Tamar, behold, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep. So she removed her widow's garments and covered herself with a veil and wrapped herself and sat in the gateway of Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah had grown up and she had not been given to him as a wife. Now, what's going on behind the scenes here is he's of age now. He should have already been given to her to replace her deceased husband. That was what was promised to her, and yet by Judah. And yet he doesn't fulfill the promise. In fact, you get a glimpse of this back up in verse 11, where he had no intention of giving this young boy to her, who's now grown to be of age. But remember, it says, I'm afraid that he too may die like his brothers. So he had no intent, it doesn't seem like, of giving him. In fact, we're going to see a little bit more about that in just a minute. So she goes and she's disguised herself, basically. She has a veil over her face, so he doesn't know who she is. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a harlot, for she had covered her face. So he turned aside to her by the road and said, here now, let me come in to you. For he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. Again, this is like an HBO special. Okay, this is crazy stuff, right? What's that? Yeah, or Jerry Springer episode. There you go. That's probably better. This is like a bad episode of Jerry Springer. So he said, here now, come, let me come in to you, for he did not know she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, what will you give me that you may come in to me? He said, therefore, I will send you a young goat from the flock. She said, moreover, will you give me a pledge until you send it? He said, what pledge shall I give you? And she said, your seal and your cord and your staff that is in your hand. So he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. Then she arose and departed and removed her veil and put on her widow's garments. When Judah sent the young goat by his friend, the Adulamite, to receive the pledge from the woman's hand, he did not find her. He asked the men of her place, saying, where is the temple prostitute who was by the road of Enaim? But they said, there has been no temple prostitute here. So he returned to Judah. Now, I know this is a lot, but this is pertinent to the storyline. So he returned to Judah and said, I did not find her, and furthermore, the men of the place said, there's been no temple prostitute here. Then Judah said, let her keep them, otherwise we will become a laughingstock. After all, I sent this young goat, but you did not find her. So he's not even going to look any harder to keep his pledge to the woman. Now, it has been about 3 months later that Judah was informed, your daughter-in-law Tamar has played the harlot, and behold, she is also with child by harlotry. Then Judah said, bring her out and let her be burned. So he's fixing to enact justice on her for being a harlot after what he's just done. That doesn't sound like a godly man, does it? Right? And we were seeing he was not behaving godly. It was, now this, I guess the just part would be, she was due to be stoned if this is true, but watch what happens. It was while she was being brought out that she sent to her father-in-law saying, I am with child by the man to whom these things belong. So she's going to give those things of his back. So again, Jerry Springer episode. The audience is just getting all fired up now. So please explain and see whose signet ring and cords and staff are these. Judah recognized them and said, she is more righteous than I. He's convicted. He recognizes his fault now. She is more righteous than I, inasmuch as I did not give her to my son Shelah. And he did not have relations with her again. It came about at that time she was giving birth that, behold, there were twins in her womb. Moreover, it took place that while she was giving birth, one put out a hand, and the midwife took and tied a scarlet thread on his hand, saying, this one came out first. Remember, because of the law of the firstborn. The firstborn gets the biggest share of the inheritance and typically is the head of the family. That's how traditionally it should have happened. We've already seen with Jacob, in Jacob's line, he and Esau. We already saw that there was this undoing of that order. But it came about, verse 29, as he drew back his hand, that behold, his brother came out. Then she said, what a breach you have made for yourself. So he was named Perez. Afterward, his brother came out, who had the scarlet thread on his hand, and he was named Zerah. Now, again, that seems like, we've said it enough, I know. Jerry Springer, HBO, some kind of, illicit affair is happening here. It doesn't seem like it has any place in the Bible. But two or three things here. One, I would say it absolutely belongs in the Bible. It perfectly helps us understand another reason why Israel had to go to Egypt and stay as long as they did. But secondly, it also shows us that the heart of man is wicked beyond all things. And it does not, the Bible thirdly, does not cover up humanity's sin, which again is another proof that the Bible is trustworthy. Every other religious text distorts the fallenness of the hero, if you will, but not the Bible. The Bible always shows the depravity of man, never tries to hide our sin. That's another reason to believe that the Bible is true. And the veracity, the truthfulness of the Bible can be upheld. But here, this story, again, for those reasons and probably more, help us to understand what's going on. So let me get here to chapter 39. I had notes here somewhere, or chapter 38, sorry. Judah is a son of Jacob. Now, we see from after this that Judah is the son through whom the seed promise is made. The Messiah was going to come down through Judah. It's not necessarily very clear at this point, but we will see that very clearly as the storyline continues. What's interesting is that Judah is not the firstborn. Judah, in fact, is the fourthborn, son. But he is the one through whom the Lord has destined for the seed promise to come true. Now, Judah takes a wife from the Canaanite people. Now, I'm emphasizing that because of the curse that was placed on Canaan. If the curse was placed on Canaan, on his line, that means that all of his descendants have the curse upon them. Does that make sense? You remember that from last week? So they are a cursed people. They're to be made an end of. And they were given, back in Genesis 15, remember they were given a 400-year time frame. There's 4 generations of people, 4 generations of time for the Israelites, from Abram's offspring, Jacob's offspring, right, until they would come back and judge the Canaanite people and take the land. That was all spelled out for us in Genesis 15, Genesis 17, and then later. But here in chapter 38, we see that what does Judah do? Judah is going to a certain Canaanite. He has a wife by a Canaanite. So their offspring was cursed. They were evil. God killed both of them. Right? That sounds harsh, but this was foretold what would happen. They weren't supposed to intermarry. They weren't supposed to have kids because, again, the lineage of the Messiah would be cut off. Now, again, people focus on is how evil God is to kill these two young men. But God wasn't evil. God was honoring His word. God was honoring a promise and helping to ensure that the Messiah would be born who would save people from their sins. That's not evil at all. That's very just and right. But we don't always look at the big picture. So people just pick and choose verses out of context and try to make God look like some big, horrible monster. But He's not. He is just, perfectly just. He's righteous. And we see that played out even in this awful story. So Judah, fourth born of Jacob, takes a Canaanite wife, so their offspring would not be pure, and the Messiah could not come through them. And the Lord has already chosen Judah to be the one through whom the Messiah is going to come. So there's a problem. He had to fix this problem, which again leads to why they're going to Egypt. He had to keep the line pure. Judah, to take a wife, threatened the survival of the Israelites, but it also threatened any chance of the Messiah to be born. Does that make sense? Any questions about that part before we move on? I mean, we're going to build on that, but it's important to understand that that's what's in view here. So what you think about if Judah's brothers would have done the same and would have gone outside of their people to take a wife from the Canaanites, the line would be completely destroyed. There would be no pure Israelites, no pure offspring of Abram down through Isaac, down through Jacob, and so on. It would end. That line would absolutely end. And so, in fact, if you think back to when Abraham sent his servant to go and get a wife for Isaac, he went back to their people. Didn't get a wife from around where they were because those were Canaanite people in that area, descendants of Canaan who had been cursed. And so he goes outside of those people, back to their people, to get a descendant. So God is acting justly, righteously, in order to keep the line pure so the Messiah could be born. Now, turn to Genesis 49. I know we're in Genesis 38, but go ahead and jump up to 39. We've hit on a lot of this already, but I want us to look at a few verses here in chapter 49 and just see this seed promise come to life, if you will. I want you to note, remember when Jacob is blessing the sons before his passing? He's going down through them. So gather the sons. There's Reuben, my firstborn. And he goes down through Simeon and Levi, and then he gets to Judah in verse 8. Judah's the fourth born. But note what happens. Judah, your brothers shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons shall bow down to you. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, you have grown up. You have gone up. He couches, he lies down as a lion, and as a lion who dares rouse him up. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until, and this is key, until Shiloh comes. And to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. And he goes on from there with more about this prophecy. But this is Jacob prophesying. He's foretelling the future about Judah. And that through Judah, that the nations would bow to him and that Shiloh would come. And he continues on. There's going to be more stuff that's touched upon. But who is Shiloh then? Shiloh is the Messiah. Shiloh is Jesus. And we can see that if we look at a couple other places. Like, turn to Numbers. If you're in Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, turn to Numbers. And look at Numbers chapter 24, verse 17. I made a list here. We won't look at all of these for time's sake, but Numbers 24, 17. He says, I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come forth from Jacob. A scepter shall rise from Israel, and shall crush through the forehead of Moab the fear of all the sons of Sheth. Now, again, this one is Shiloh. This is the Messiah. This is the offspring of Judah that they're prophesying about in context. And you can go back and read. This is about Balaam, right, in that context there. But you can see the storyline progress there. Turn to Psalm 60. That's a big jump, but we're just going to highlight a few of these. Psalm 60. Whoops, went too far. Look at Psalm 60. Look at verse 7. Gilead is mine. Manasseh is mine. Ephraim also is the helmet of my head. Judah is my scepter. This is God speaking. But Judah is the scepter, the rod of iron, the lion. So in fact, Jesus is called the Lion of the tribe of Judah. This is, again, messianic. This is pointing to Jesus, Shiloh, the Messiah. Psalm 108, verse 8. Psalm 108, verse 8. Gilead is mine, Manasseh is mine, Ephraim also is the helmet of my head. Judah is the scepter. He repeats the same thing. He goes on again. But all throughout the Psalms. In fact, turn back to Psalm 2. We won't look at all of these, but I'll try to give them to you later if you really want to chase this down. But if you have in your margins or in your footnotes, you should have like little references, and it'll kind of, if you follow these references, you'll probably get all of those references to Shiloh or to Judah or the scepter. It all is in the same context. You can chase that down all throughout the Old Testament into the New Testament. But look at Psalm 2. Psalm 2 is interesting. This psalm is a messianic psalm. It talks about the millennial kingdom, in fact. And I know there's a lot in the covenantal side, the hyper-Calvinistic circles that reject this outright. But it's in context, it's very clear, I believe, that this is a messianic psalm. But it also speaks very clearly, too, in verses 6 through 9, to Shiloh, to Messiah. So look at verses 6 through 9. We don't have time to go through the whole thing, but 6 through 9 we'll look at. As for me, this is God speaking. As for me, I've installed my king upon Zion, my holy mountain. Where is Mount Zion? Jerusalem. This is Jerusalem, the holy city. All right? So Zion, Mount Zion, that's another name for Jerusalem. I will surely tell the decree of Yahweh. He said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I'll surely give you the nations as your inheritance, and the very ends of the earth as your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron. You shall shatter them like earthenware. In context, he's talking about Messiah, Shiloh. He's talking about the Son of God, right? The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my hand while I make your enemies a footstool. That's what's in view here. This is messianic, and it takes place. Shiloh, this descendant of Judah, is going to sit upon that throne of David. Now, we haven't gotten to David yet. David's coming in a few weeks, but he's going to be the one who sits on that throne. No one has sat on that throne no one has been seated on that throne since before the days of Jesus. And so a lot of people think, well, this was fulfilled in 70 AD when Jerusalem was ransacked. But that is false, because there was no Shiloh sitting. There was no king, Messiah, sitting on a throne in Jerusalem. That has not happened yet, which is another check mark in the column of a real, literal millennial kingdom coming in the future sometime. Jesus will literally sit upon a throne. In fact, let me just give you a couple more verses. Isaiah 42. Is that one on the screen there? You got it? Yeah. Behold my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one in whom my soul is well pleased. I have put my spirit upon him. He will bring forth justice to the nations. Look at verse 4. He'll bring justice to the nations. Verse 4. He will not be faint or crushed until he has established justice in the earth, and the coastlands will wait expectantly for his law. There's a literal law from a literal ruler who will be literally sitting upon a throne in Jerusalem. And this is going to be during the millennial kingdom. Look at 49 verse 6, still in Isaiah. Isaiah 49 verse 6. He says, it is too small a thing that you should be my servant, to raise up the tribe of Jacob and to cause the preserved ones of Israel to return. I will also give you as a light to the nations, so that my salvation may reach to the end of the earth. Again, these are messianic prophecies, if you will. These are spoken. Isaiah written some 700 years before Jesus was born. And again, if it's been 2,000 years since then, so 2,700 years, and we're not even into the millennial kingdom yet. So these were given over 2,000 years ahead of time to show that the Messiah, Jesus, Shiloh, right, the Lion of Judah, will sit upon a literal throne and reign. Now, just real quick, since we're already on this trail, turn to the book of Revelation, the very last book of the Bible, remember? Revelation chapter 12, verse 5. I'll give you two verses here. This is like the crown or the icing maybe on the cake. That's better said, I guess. In verse 5, this is prophecy here. The sign of the woman, right, clothed with the sun. This is a reference to Israel. This prophecy here in chapter 12, a lot of people say that this is Mary. It's not Mary, it's Israel. And we know that because of how this illustration is first given to us in the book of Genesis. It's with Jacob and his wife, and Joseph picks up on it, right? Back in Genesis chapter, let me see, I wrote this down somewhere. Genesis chapter 37, verse 9, if you want to just reference that later. Genesis 37, verse 9. So, in verse 5 of Revelation 12, he says, and she gave birth, Israel gave birth to a son, a male child who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up to God and to his throne. That's the ascension. And it goes on from there. The woman fled into the wilderness. That's Israel. This is a prophecy of Israel. It's not Mary. This has nothing to do with Mary, the biological mother of Jesus, okay? Nothing at all. The Catholic Church demands that it's Mary because it fits their false narrative that they get to rule and reign. I mean, they have to. They have to allegorize. The Roman Church allegorizes many of the messianic prophecies, all of the things pertaining to Israel. In fact, everything pertaining to Israel, except the judgments, I should say. But all the blessings of Israel have been ceded over to us according to Romanism. But that is not true. Israel is still Israel. Israel and the church are not the same thing. Not the same thing. And we're going to see that as this storyline progresses. But the other places in Revelation 19, verse 15, and I'll move on. I know I've probably spent too much time looking at this, but I just think it's fascinating that all the way back here with Judah, we see the promise of the Messiah. Well, before him, but we really see it in that line of the lion of Judah, that idea carrying over all the way through Revelation here. So Revelation chapter 19, verse 15. Speaking of Jesus, from his mouth comes a sharp sword, so that with it he may strike down the nations, and he will rule them with a rod of iron, and he treads the winepress of the fierce wrath of God the Almighty. This is Jesus ruling and reigning, literally destroying enemies to set up his kingdom. Again, I don't know why people are so hard-pressed to allegorize this and say that we're living in the millennial kingdom. Eric, you know, they say that we're living in the millennial kingdom right now, that this is the perfect rule of God on earth. That's right. Absolutely not. It's not the perfect rule on earth. If this is the perfect rule of God on earth, then it leaves a lot to be desired. Sin runs rampant right now. And so that is false. That is Augustinian. It's a lie that Augustine really started. Origin fed into, and the Catholic Church took hold of it. And the Reformers during Reformation, they never sought to reform these ideas. Remember what the Reformation did. Thank the Lord it did it. But the Reformation, the only doctrines that the Reformation was focused on was what? Salvation, right? The main thing, the salvation. And how the church was run, basically. But salvation was the key thing that they fought for. That we're saved by faith, right? We're justified by faith. The righteous shall live by faith. That's what triggered Luther. From Habakkuk, from Romans, and then in James, that you see that 3 times throughout the Bible. And that really took hold of Luther and made him question, Catholicism, rightly so. And God used him as a light to light up the Reformation. It was already started, but it really took hold. He was like the spark, I guess, right? That really took off. But that was the core. But once that battle was waged, and it was several centuries, this battle was fought. It's still being fought today, honestly. But they never focused on eschatology or Israelology or really got more into the distinction of the church in Israel. That wasn't the point of the Reformation. And so the Catholic Church and then the Protestant churches during the Reformation time still had the same Israel doctrines that they had from Augustine and Origen and so on. They never reformed those ideas. There were sparks of it during the Reformation, but that was not the main thrust. You even see in some of the Puritans, like later guys like J.C. Ryle, who was Church of England Anglican, but he had that Puritan kind of hold on him as well. And even with Thomas Watson, one of the key Puritans, they still sought to distinguish Israel and the church. There was always a remnant, a seed of truth that carried on. Even consider people like I know I'm chasing a rabbit here, but consider even Waldensians or the Valdensians, however you want to say it, like Peter Valdo, one of the early reformers. Catholic Church pronounced them heretics and started burning them at the stake. The Waldensians or Valdensians, it's spelled with a W, but I think technically it's pronounced Valden. The Valdensians, they were just pure Protestants. And in fact, a lot of the what's called dispensational ideals was even taught in the Waldensian circles. They were carrying true Protestant, the ideal of, just being a biblical church. They held on to those ideals even during time of the Reformation, when the Catholic Church, or before the Reformation, when the Catholic Church was seeking to destroy them. But sorry, I love history, so I got a little sidetracked there. Let's wheel it back in here. So Shiloh is the Messiah. That's messianic. And so that's important because the seed promise, right? The seed promise. What's the seed promise? We'll go back to Genesis 3. Let's remind ourselves what the seed promise is. Genesis chapter 3. I don't think this is on the screen, but Genesis 3:15. God pronounced judgment after Adam and Eve sinned, right? Pronounced judgment on the serpent, on Adam and on Eve. He says, I will put enmity between you and the woman. He's talking to the serpent. I'll put enmity, which is Satan, that's the devil. I'll put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise you on the head, and you shall bruise him on the heel. Seed here is singular. This is what's called the proto-evangelium, or the proto-gospel, the gospel beforehand, basically. And so this is the first promise of the Messiah. And being the seed of a woman, it means he'll be virgin born. I mean, that's what that means. Did they understand that? Probably not at this time, but we know that because we get to look back from Luke chapter 2 and Matthew and all that, and we see the promise of the virgin birth. We even see it in Isaiah. The book of Isaiah talks about it as well. Chapter 7, chapter 9, through there. But that's what this is. And so the seed of the woman, that's the seed promise. And it carries on. In fact, just for memory's sake, we have a few minutes, chapter 4 of Genesis. Remember how she thought that it was being fulfilled right then? The man had relations with his wife, Eve, and she conceived and gave birth to Cain. And she said, I have gotten a man-child with the help of Yahweh. Literally, I've gotten the man-child, even Yahweh, even Jehovah. That's literally how it's written. That just is odd. And so they've tamed it a little bit in English here. But it seems to me that she thought she was giving birth to the Messiah right there, the one that was promised in 3:15. Now, she was sorely mistaken because Cain was a sinful man, right? We see that very quickly, how quickly. He was, what was that? Evil, yeah. But he had an opportunity to repent too. God gave him an opportunity, but he did not. That's in Genesis 4:7. God was very patient with him. But again, that seed promise then continues, and so Seth is the replacement for Abel. And so we see then down through Seth, Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, which is my favorite name in the Bible. I've got big money to pay to anyone who will name their son Mahalalel. I'm just telling you, I don't know how much it'll be, but whatever I've got is yours if you will name your son Mahalalel. It's just so good. Mahalalel! It just be so good. I just want to hear somebody yelling that down the road. Mahalalel, you better get in here. Something. It's just a great name. Anyway, it means blessed God. I mean, it's a good name, but it's just fun to say. So Yared, and that's not the subway Jared, but it's Yared, Jared, and then Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, and Noah, and then down through the line of Seth. But the promise of the seed keeps coming up. And again, we see it here with Judah. And that's what we saw at the end in Genesis 49. And then that takes us to Exodus 1. I know we looked here a little bit last time, but we didn't get very far. So let's look at just, again, why did Israel have to go to Egypt and stay so long? One reason was the famine. That's the obvious reason. That's the first kind of thing people go to. 7 years of famine. They went. Jacob brought his family. Joseph saved them all. Yes, immediately he saved them all. But the reason it all started was bigger than just the 7 years of famine. The reason was the cursed line of Canaan from Genesis 9. They began to intermarry. Judah, Genesis 38. And the seed promise was in jeopardy of being cut off and destroyed. And God is sovereign, so he protects that by sending Israel to Egypt to exist. They go to, can you go to the picture of Goshen? Remember towards the end down there at the bottom, I think. I don't know if you can see this, but do you see Lower Egypt up there? All right, so Lower Egypt, if you go to the right, there's there you go, thank you. I can't read that from here, but that's Ramesses, like right there by the R of Lower. And then I can't remember what's above that. But right between them and to the right is the area of Goshen. In fact, those Ramesses and all, I mean, just east of Ramesses there, to the right of Ramesses, That would be the area of Goshen. Now, it's situated in between some of the vestibules of the Nile. The Nile, once it gets up here, well, I guess it really starts there in the Mediterranean. But right there at the head, there's tons of tributaries that form all through there. And the Goshen is a very fertile area. And so the question everyone has is, why were the Egyptians so quick to give Joseph and the Israelites that land when it was such a prime piece of real estate? And that's a great question. And we have the answer tonight. We're fixing to get into it. Do you know the answer? Oh, well, maybe you'll be right. So just hold on. But that area was super fertile. The Egyptians should have wanted it. So why didn't they? Why was it just sitting there waiting for God to use for the Israelites? Why did God hide his people away there? And what protected them? Because that's part of it. Even in Egypt, they get sold into slavery so that they'll be protected. The line is protected because they were slaves. The Egyptians weren't at that point about to take them to have offspring with them. Yet, we're going to see that as the plan unravels here, and I mean Pharaoh's plan, look at verse 8 again. They're being isolated here. Now, this is before slavery, I guess, right, where they picked this land. But we're going to see how it all comes into play here because of the slavery, or we're going to understand it because of the slavery aspect. Verse 8 says, a new king arose over Egypt. This is a Pharaoh, and he's going to be called Pharaoh here in just a few verses. But Pharaoh, the word Pharaoh actually means, I just drew a blank, great house. Whew, great house. It means great house. So the word Pharaoh, and that's an anglicized pronunciation of it, but the root for great house, Pharaoh, is really just like three letters, if I remember right, but that would be an anglicized pronunciation of it. But it spoke of the dynasty, not just the leader, not just the king, Pharaoh, but it spoke of the whole dynasty. And that's well known throughout archaeologists and historians and those folks. They understand that, and that's where I learned that from. But in Exodus, a new king, a new Pharaoh arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. Now, how in the world could a new Pharaoh, did we talk about this last week? How could a new Pharaoh come up who did not know Joseph and his people? Now, they died. Verse 6, we see that whole generation had died off. And so they're not that far removed. And everyone should know, I mean, we still know Joseph today because of the Bible and because of archaeology, right, and other history. Joseph is well known in even secular histories. And there are archaeological finds that support Joseph and the biblical timeline. We can talk more about that if time allows. But we know him, so why didn't this Pharaoh know him? And there's a great answer that I never knew until just a couple weeks ago. I never understood this, or really, I just would kind of just glass over and didn't get it until I dug a little deeper. And Jessica, her question last week, or week before, really helped me to dig in and found something that I never knew, and it's just awesome. I love learning. So here we go. And we're going to see that it directly ties into the Mosaic Covenant. All this is pertinent. Now, let me just tell you very quickly here this ideal of Exodus 1:8, why this guy doesn't know Joseph. So put on the back of your handout is a chart. Put that chart up there. I think it shows a timeline, maybe it's called. I forgot the name of it. I usually print out those notes so I'll be able to reference them. That's it. Now, I know it's probably hard to see here, but if you note on the left, you have a timeline of Joseph entering into Egypt around 1705 BC. Now, again, that's just a rough estimate. Israel enters Egypt, right? And then the Israelites are enslaved. But you see 16th and 17th, those are the dynasties. Now, some people have dated this way earlier. I think that, what's his name? The book, I bought it. David Roll, thank you. Interesting read. I just went through it real quick and emphasized, really spent some time the last 2 days on this section. I think, I may be wrong, because again, like I said, I went through it real quick, but I think he dates all of this 12th and 13th century. I may be wrong, but this is the timeline I believe is accurate. This one lines up very well. And again, check me on that. I may be wrong about his timeline. But 16th and 17th dynasties. Those aren't centuries. Those are dynasties. Then you see the long 18th dynasty. That's the biggest portion of this storyline here. The 18th dynasty here is when Israel's enslaved. This 18th dynasty begins here with this new king in Exodus 1:8. That is the 18th dynasty. You can lay those out, I believe, historically, archaeologically, and obviously biblically. Now again, Bible interprets those other things, not the other way around. And I think sometimes historians will try to squeeze the Bible into things rather than really carefully reading the Bible and seeing how things are to be squeezed into it rather than the other way around. But the 18th dynasty is long. And you see what is that? Ahmose? It looks like Amos or Amosi. It's Akhmos. That's Egyptian, Akhmos. Akhmos, right there, I believe, is the king or the pharaoh. And I think history proves this. I think archaeology proves this as well. He is the king or the pharaoh of verse 8. I think it lines up very well here. In fact, do you see that Israel and the pharaohs timeline or that chart? Should be right there by that. If you'll pull that one up real quick. This one is not on your paper. Do you see that other? Did that not save? There it is. Again, hard to see probably. But if you look down, where are we at? You look down, you see Akhmos the first, the pharaoh who did not know Joseph. Exodus 1:8, kind of in the middle of the page there. That's the guy we're talking about. And his dates, again, roughly 1570 to 1546 here. And then after him, we have Amenhotep, all right? Amenhotep. The first, it's going to go on, and then down here towards the bottom, in fact, the very bottom, you see, say it? Did you pronounce it? Amenhotep. The second down here. Now, this guy is interesting. The Exodus was in 1445, so it's during him. So there's been a few changes in regime of pharaohs. But all of these pharaohs from Akhmos the first all the way down to Amenhotep the second, that's still all the 18th dynasty. That's all that one dynasty of Egypt. And that's important to understand. Now go back again to the chart we were just on. I know this is a lot, but I'll tell you, I just love this stuff. I hope I'm not boring you to tears here. If I am, just, don't tell me, all right? Don't crush me. Now you see the two blanks up there on the upper right? Let's talk about those blanks, because what you see there are the Hyksos, the Hyksos, and then you see the word Egyptian under that. That's right. So the Hyksos are not Egyptians, but the Hyksos were the rulers when Joseph and his family went into Egypt. Now, why is that a big deal? This is phenomenal when you look at this on the big scale of things historically. The Hyksos were Semitic people. Now, what does that mean? They were related back to Abraham. They're related to Joseph more so than what we call Egyptians. Now, who did the Egyptians come from then? The Egyptians are Hamites. They came from Ham, Noah's sons. All right? I couldn't hear what you said, but through Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Shem, Semites. Through Shem, he's the chosen line. The seed line is coming down through Shem. That's the Semitic people, the Semites, down through him. The Hyksos were Semitic people. They were related, which is why it always seems strange. Why are they going to allow this slave to be like as powerful as Pharaoh? I mean, he was Pharaoh's right hand. He had charge of all of the finances, all of the food sources, the grains, the lands. Everyone did the bidding of Joseph, who did the bidding of Pharaoh. How could an Egyptian Pharaoh elevate a Hebrew guy to such a lofty position? Because they have the same ancestry. They're the same people. And why we know that, I mean, I never noticed this. I don't know how I missed this, but I missed this until just a couple weeks ago. But historically, archaeologically, this is so incredible when you understand that it was easy for them to allow Joseph and Joseph's family to come in and even to give them that plush piece of real estate in Goshen, which is the eastern side of the lower. I mean, we're looking at it on top. It should be upper in our mind, I know, but that's called Lower Egypt. Upper Egypt was further down into the continent, right? But Lower Egypt up there and to the east, right? That's Israel over there. To the right of our map, yeah, that's Israel over there. The Sinai Peninsula, Israel's up there in the upper right side. That's all Israel. And so Goshen is really between. And it's super fertile because it's in those tributaries of the Nile. It's prime real estate. So when you understand that Pharaoh, who was on the throne of Egypt when Joseph came in, was Semitic, and Pharaoh that comes in Exodus chapter 1, verse 8, is Hamitic, is a Hamite. That's the true Egyptians. In fact, do you have the genealogy? There's some slides that show the lines of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. It just kind of gives us very quickly an overview of the people groups. Right, so here's Shem, Ham, and Japheth. You see Ham, the Hamitic peoples, Ethiopians, Egyptians, Canaanites. Now, that particular line, Canaanites, are the ones that were cursed. So that's going to be, that's a big deal, remember, because of the intermarriage, why God was protecting them. But the Hamitic people are the Egyptian people, the Philistines, Babylonians, there's others. Go up to Shem, the Semitic people, Jews, Arabs, Assyrians, Arameans, and Phoenicians. It's two different people groups. They come from two different lines. And so the true Egyptians are from Ham. They didn't get along. They had been invaded. It was before the 12th century, I think. I can't remember. Right around, the dynasty, 12th dynasty, not 12th century, 12th dynasty. But in that area, 12th through 17th dynasties. I think that's right. The 12th through 17th dynasties in Egypt were Semitic. But then the 18th dynasty, the true Egyptians, quote unquote, the Hamites, take back over. And archaeology affirms all of these things. The dates sometimes are tweaked here and there, but it lines up perfectly if you take the biblical account. So is there another slide about this? I can't remember. Is there another one? Okay. So go back to our big chart then, the big chart, and see. No, the other one. I'm sorry. The other big chart. If you're watching from home, you're thoroughly confused, I know. But so up here, the Hyksos, those are Semites. The Egyptians are Hamites. That's why there was this tension. And that's why verse 8 in Exodus 1, a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. It's not even to say that he didn't have any idea who he was. He didn't know him in the sense of he didn't want to know him. He was the wrong people. He had to be overthrown. And so whenever this Pharaoh comes into power, this king, whenever Ahmose came into power, he began to slaughter all of the Hyksos Egyptians, Semites, right? The ancestors of Shem, right? He began to slaughter them. He enslaved some of them. And that's why the Israelites also who were there, Joseph's descendants, they're enslaved. There were other, probably, most likely, almost definitively, I would say, there were other Hyksos who had been enslaved alongside of them also. But the emphasis, again, from God's perspective is the offspring of Joseph and his family, Judah's line here that's being protected. Does that make sense? To me, I know this may be so boring to y'all. I'm sorry. I just think this is fascinating because what it does is even modern archaeological discoveries, if they're honest about them, they support this very timeline right here. They support the Bible's storyline of what happened with Joseph. And even more interesting, you can stay there. Look at Amenhotep II. You say it better than I do. Amenhotep II. If you look at him, 1447, he is the Pharaoh over the Exodus. So when we get to next week, we'll look at this. When we begin to look at the plagues and what happened during the Exodus, we're just going to highlight that because we're really going to focus on the final plague, the 10th plague, and then the release of the Israelites. But when you get there, it's this Pharaoh, Amenhotep II, 1447. He's the guy who is going to finally release them, and he's the guy that is going to be killed. Oh, we're out of time already. Oh, man. I'm so sorry. I didn't know we were so late. My apologies. I got excited, Lydia. I'm sorry. Let me wrap up by saying this. I will put in our Facebook group. There's a link that Brooks Schweitzer sent to me. Thanks, Brooks. Brooks sent to me this past week. It's a biblical archaeology. It's like 23 minutes long. It's very good, but they go into a tomb, go down into a tomb in Egypt, and lo and behold, it's Amenhotep II's tomb. And what's interesting about that is that his mummy is there. It's been ransacked, right? Everything valuable is taken out. In fact, you see on the video when they go into this tomb, the mummy's laying there looking at them. It's been desecrated, but it's laying on the ground looking at them. Not like it's not alive looking at them, but it's facing them. I should say it's facing them. Okay, so it's facing them. And so, but it's really interesting. It's only 23 minutes long, I think. But I'll give you that link on our Facebook group when I get done here so you can see this. But it's him, and what's amazing, unlike any other mummy that they found, he has boils on him. This mummy was, this Pharaoh was mummified, and there's still the evidence of boils. Now, why is that important? Because it proves what happened with the 10th plague during the Exodus. It's amazing. And so archaeology has, God preserved it. Archaeology has discovered it, preserved it. It's been recorded. And so we can know definitively how this timeline works out. I'm just thrilled to death talking about this stuff. Again, I know that maybe that's too much. So what we'll do next week, we'll really get into the Exodus proper, which then will give us the basis for the Mosaic covenant. Now, I know the other covenants, we didn't go back and take all of this time. But this one is different. The Mosaic covenant is a conditional covenant, and it's built upon, I'll do this, but you have to do this. If you don't do this, I'm not obligated to this anymore from God's perspective. And so there are conditions. This background that we just looked at show us why the conditions were given that were given. God wanted a people that were separate. And so the law, the Mosaic law, is going to require now. It had already been told to them, they didn't honor it. But now part of the covenant is going to be that they don't intermarry with the other tribes, the Canaanites. God is wanting to preserve a pure line for Shiloh, for Messiah to come. Does that make sense? And so when you look at it this way historically, all right, I think it gives it more weight because you see how awesome God is in orchestrating all these things. There's 1,000 more things we could say, but I'm going to stop here. Any questions about any of this? Yes. Can't hear. Oh, some blanks? Okay, I missed some blanks. Let me see if I have my paper up here. Thought I had it. What did I do with it? There it is. Okay, so last blanks. This ties directly into the Mosaic covenant. All right, did I say that already? Okay. All right, ties directly in. And what happens is God will later codify the nation's separation from the world through the giving of the law. And the Mosaic covenant, the giving of the law, is unique, but it's tied to all of this history we just did. Again, I know some of you may not like history. I'm a history buff. I love it. So this was fun for me. It may have been like pulling teeth for you. I apologize if it was. But when we get to the stuff next week and the week after, the light bulb should be going off for you. You'll see how the history ties into these things. So I'll send that link. In fact, I'll do that right now. I think I have it here. Nope. I will send it as soon as I can pull that up. And yeah, there it is. Woo-hoo. All right, I will share that with you. It's 26 minutes. I apologize. Tomb of the Exodus Pharaoh is what it's called. It's from something called Expedition Bible. Now, I'm not...
This credit trick was banned from
yeah, there you go.
for decades.
Don't you just love commercials? I'm not saying that everything this guy does is legit. I have no idea. I haven't watched anything else they do. But this is very good, and it points to that timeline. And so it's called Expedition Bible. I can't remember the guy's name, honestly. Again, I've only looked at this one thing, so if you look at some more, let me know if it's good or not. But this one, I want you to see because of the Amenhotep II. Yeah, Amenhotep II. Thank you. Huh? Buried in a hot tub. Hot tub? What, a hot? What? Hot soil? Talk louder, please. I got you.
Like just a cliff.
Yep.
And they were burying the pharaohs, which is where King Tut was buried.
That's right.